Simon Cellan-Jones's action comedy film The Family Plan, starring Mark Wahlberg and Michelle Monaghan, is predictable and average at best. Centered around the Morgan family, we have Dan, a pre-owned car seller, his wife, Jessica, a physical therapist, and their 3 children, Nina, Max, and Kyle. Dan seemed to be just a regular family guy, but his strange obsession with not having his picture published anywhere was odd from the very beginning. Jessica appreciated her husband's loving gestures, but at the same time, she could not deny the monotony she experienced in the relationship. Kyle was a gamer boy, and since his father had banned gaming at home, he found the perfect alternative to keep his passion going. Meanwhile, Nina decided to give up on her career goals after her boyfriend, Trevor, convinced her to do so, a decision that the rest of the family disapproved of. The regular family, with the usual problems, ends up in the most outrageous situation that they perhaps had never dreamed of. A trip to Vegas ultimately brings the family together in the most unexpected way. It was their 18th anniversary, and just like every year, Dan took Jessica to the amusement park where they had met each other for the first time. Dan loved a routine, and with him, even the celebration was exactly the same every year. Jessica loved her husband, but she wanted to break free from the routine. Dan enjoyed being the family man. He was a responsible father and a caring husband, and he was proud of the way his life had been shaped. He would not have preferred changing any aspect of it, had he not met a bunch of teenage boys on the night of their anniversary. They clicked a picture of Dan and Jessica and refused to delete it. Dan wanted to teach the boys a lesson, but he did not wish to create a scene in front of his wife. He went back home, but a part of him regretted not taking any action. We soon find out in The Family Plan who Dan is. While shopping for diapers at the convenience store, a man attacks Dan, and he takes down the stranger with some swift moves. Dan hurried home and packed his bags, knowing that he was no longer safe in Buffalo. He called up his old friend, an expert in forging IDs, to make fake passports for him and his family. After promising to hand him the cash, Augie agreed to the deal. Dan picked up Nina from school, and while looking for Kyle, he found out that his son had never given up on his gaming dreams. But Dan had no time to spare and rushed to Jessica's chamber to convince her to join them on a road trip to Las Vegas. Jessica had always wanted spontaneity, and while she did not expect Dan to be this spontaneous, she ultimately agreed to travel to Vegas by road. Dan soon realized that he was being tracked down, and to get rid of the men, he entered the car dealership store and found the tracking device. He fixed the device on Hal's car, and finally, it was time to head to Vegas. The people who were after him did not give up, and at night, when his entire family was fast asleep except his toddler Max, the only one who knew what his father was up to, Dan tackled the attackers and was out of the messy situation with only a crack in his rearview mirror. The next morning, the family was surprised to find out that they were in Iowa. Dan did not sleep the entire night to keep his family safe. Nina was adamant about checking out Southern Iowa University, the college where Trevor went. While Jessica was completely against the idea, they ultimately decided to give it a go. Nina ended up getting heartbroken after finding out that Trevor was cheating on her. But thanks to her father, she quickly learned a Kyusho Jitsu move that helped her teach Trevor a lesson. With no phones to distract them, the Morgan family felt closer to each other than before, especially Nina and Kyle. Strangely enough, the trip was going great, but every once in a while, Dan came face to face with his enemies, and he took down one man after another. After plenty of distractions, Dan and his family were finally in Las Vegas. Dan prepared to confess the truth to Jessica, but before he did so, he met with Augie. The passports were ready, and Dan was set to move to Vancouver with his family. At dinner that evening, Dan was almost ready to come clean, but the thought of ruining Jessica's perfect night made him change his mind. Meanwhile, the kids were supposed to be in the luxurious suite, but they decided to venture out. Kyle was a popular gamer boy, and he wanted to check out the gaming competition that was taking place in Vegas. He finally met his fellow gamer friends, and he was requested to join the team to play the final battle. Meanwhile, Nina met Ren, a gaming expert, at the show, and romantic sparks started to blow off soon. Things were going great for the kids, or so they thought. They were unaware of the assassins waiting to get hold of them at the gaming center. When Dan and Jessica returned to the hotel for a romantic night, they soon encountered more assassins. Jessica had no idea what was going on, but seeing Dan with a gun in his hand and a blade snuck in his sock pretty much summarized the story for her. Dan managed to kill the threats, and he and Jessica headed out to get their kids. Jessica refused to speak to Dan. She felt cheated after finding out that he had been lying to her for the past 18 years. While Dan claimed to love his family life, it was obvious to Jan that he did enjoy indulging in violence. She felt she discovered a new Dan in the course of the trip, and after finding out the truth, she realized that maybe he did miss his past life. Kyle and Nina laughed when their father claimed to be an ex-assassin, but as soon as they saw Dan in action with a gun in his hand, their jaws dropped. After his family found out his secret, Dan sat them down and told them his whole story, or at least some of it. Dan's real name was Sean, and after losing his mother at a young age, his violence-prone father had been an influence. At the age of 18, he joined the army, and he was great at his job. His life took a turn when a former SAS agent named McCaffrey approached him and recruited him for a special program. McCaffrey had become a father figure, and he trusted him blindly. The special operations were initially legitimate, but McCaffrey gradually became even more greedy, and he used men such as Sean as mercenaries. Jessica and the kids were shocked to learn about Dan's past. Even though they were family, he chose to hide an integral truth about himself. When he handed his family the forged passports, they refused to go along with him. They loved the lives they had built, and they could not imagine leaving them all behind and starting all over again. Jessica announced that she would make her own decision, and she contacted Gwen. Jessica met Gwen at the gym during a kickboxing class. She claimed to be in the travel business and arrived in Buffalo to meet her ex. Jessica contacted her to find a way to travel from Las Vegas back home. Sean knew that his family would be in trouble if they went out on their own, but they refused to listen to him. Soon, Jessica and the kids figured out that Gwen had laid a trap, and they walked into it. We find out in the family plan that Gwen was Sean's ex-girlfriend, and when she learned that he had settled in Buffalo, she wanted to see for herself the life that he had built. By the time Jessica realized she had made a mistake, it was too late. McCaffrey came on board, and Gwen handed over Jessica, Kyle, and Nina to him. Gwen was still in love with Sean, and he was all that she wanted. The family was taken over to the old Poseidon casino, and Sean was asked to come and save them. During the family plan's ending, Sean finally comes face to face with McCaffrey and Gwen. He was ready to negotiate with them, but first, he wanted them to let go of his family. As it turned out, McCaffrey was Sean's father, and he had been searching for his son for years now. He initially wanted to seek revenge for Sean's betrayal, but after seeing how good of a killer Sean still was, McCaffrey was proud of him. Instead of getting rid of him, McCaffrey wanted Sean back in the business. Sean agreed to the deal, and Jessica, Kyle, and Nina were allowed to return to Buffalo. Leaving their father behind seemed unfair. The Morgan family was finally back together after Sean knocked Gwen senseless with a Kyusho Jitsu move. Sean decided to make good use of Kyle's talent. The video gamer took control of the drone and helped his father fight his enemies. With Kyle's help, Sean was unstoppable, but things got a bit tense when Gwen woke up. When it came to her family, Jessica was ready to do whatever it took to protect them, and she ended up killing Gwen. After destroying everyone in the room, it was time for Sean to deal with his father. When he was in a tough spot, his family stepped in and distracted McCaffrey, and ultimately, Sean ended up knocking out his father. The family plan ends with the police arriving at the scene and escorting the Morgan family out. 6 months later, we learn that McCaffrey was imprisoned, and Nina, who had always aspired to be a journalist, covered the story of the clandestine paramilitary group. We can assume that Sean cooperated to bring down his father and his group, and as a result, he was spared from any legal action. Sean started his own security company. After one adventurous road trip, the family committed themselves to going on a trip every year. The rule was still the same: no cell phones during the trip. Thank you for joining us on this journey. And I hope you enjoyed the movie.